Hi, everyone. This is Nick Rebulis. I'm the editor of Educational Theory. This is another in a series of interviews with authors who have papers appearing in the journal. Today's guest is Gerry Dunne, who guest edited a set of papers, a really outstanding set of papers on the idea of vice epistemology. Gerry, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So the title of the symposium is Epistemological Vices, Moving Beyond Saints and Sinners. I've got a few questions to ask you. So let's start with this question. Why start with vices and the need to avoid vices, as opposed to talking about epistemological virtues and how to promote virtues? Or are they two sides of the same coin? How are they related to each other?
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, so much has been written about epistemological virtues already that I find instead focusing on vices has a pedagogical value insofar as if you take virtues to be excellences, it's pretty much working from an ideal epistemology framework and telling people that this is how the world ought to be is all well and good, absolutely. But I wanted to find a common ground. We all make mistakes. We're all flawed individuals. Some of us have entrenched biases, prejudices, whatever it might be, but that we all make mistakes and that there is a kind of a common thread in those mistakes. So for me, it makes sense to look at how things play out in the real world as opposed to how things ought to be in some sort of ideal world. Another reason, to my mind, was that when we talk about virtue epistemology, sometimes there's a tendency to talk about exemplarism in a sense where the exemplars are pretty much unattainable to the average person on the street. And I think pedagogically that poses problems to the university, staff, pedagogues, and so on. And also, when you deal with exemplars pretty much time and time again, there's the question of, as to whether or not they are relevant to the people that you're teaching about. And seeing someone who's pretty much exhibiting the virtues in flawless manner mightn't be the best way to motivate people, many of whom are struggling with some of these vices. I think also students need to identify with people who make mistakes, flawed epistemic agents, and that when you work from a mistake, you're bringing people along with you, many of whom make the same mistake, and in that way, when it comes to ameliorating those vices, I think pedagogically it makes sense to deal with flawed characters, flawed epistemic agents who make what are common enough mistakes.
So that idea that we're all flawed and we all make mistakes partly explains your subtitle, Beyond Saints and Sinners.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's good enough just to say, look, here's a perfect epistemic agent working in a perfect environment where everything goes to plan. It doesn't happen. I mean, we often have to satisfy some occasion. We have limited cognitive processing capacities. We live in a busy world. It doesn't always happen. And so I think it makes more sense to deal with the mistakes many of us make as a result of living in non-ideal conditions and really focusing on the mechanics of how an inquirer operates in a world where there's limited information to make decisions about the world in which we live in, and not to spend all of our time looking at the ideal epistemic agent, the Platonic ideal, of which most people find unattainable or certainly not relevant to their own lived experience.
Thank you for that. So what do you think are some of the major epistemic vices that educators should be concerned about? It's obviously a very timely topic today. in terms of certain features of our political discourse in a number of countries. But let's approach this, first of all, in the educational framework. Which are the epistemic or epistemological vices that you think are most of greatest concern right now?
I suppose closed-mindedness is always one. What I deem to be a vice as well would be that of epistemic uncharitableness, where you don't give a person the time and the space to enunciate, to explain their view, and as a result, you shut down the conversational process too early, with the result that you've already made up your mind about what you think the person is going to tell you or explain to you. And I think that that is something in certainly political discourse and indeed in educational discourse is a problem for us at the moment. Obviously, irrationality, what I call evidential kind of thresholds, mistaken evidential thresholds, basically the point at which you think you have the right to say that you believe something to be the case or you know something to be the case, is often a lot lower for those who mightn't fully kind of appreciate how complex the world is or have very, very fixed trenchant views about the world. And again, I would see that as being a vice of sorts. And then drawing on Kassam's work, insouciance, the whole idea of not, caring necessarily about the truth, that it's the world in which we live in can be boiled down to, well, if I don't know it, I can look it up. And I think that that is a vice in and of itself. That can lead to disastrous consequences in some respects, so that would be some of the kind of cardinal vices. And then I think there's several scholars working in this area now, vices in relation to attentional selection. I think that's a really, really interesting area. How do we as epistemic agents or inquirers, how do we focus our powers of attention on certain phenomena, and what criteria do we use in order to explain the focus of our attention, and how can that those attentional kind of dynamics and the effort that's involved in that, how can that get distorted in an unideal world where different epistemic agents have different agendas and different biases and prejudices, and one prejudice can make another prejudice from another person slightly better or worse, depending on the nature of the conversational exchange. So I'm very interested in that topic too, or what some would call illusionary silencing. There will be, there are subtle ways of silencing a conversation, or what a person wishes to contribute to a particular debate. That plays out in real world scenarios and in boardrooms up and down the country, in educational settings, and so on and so forth. So that would be some of the main ones that I would see as being of interest to educators at the moment, and certainly something we ideally should spend some time on.
Thank you. So one of the points that you make is that these aren't just a concern in our social and political discourse generally, but specifically in educational settings, these vices interfere with the activities or can interfere with the activities of teaching and learning themselves.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ideally you want students to be responsible and effective inquirers, but so many things mitigate against that, be it environmental or characterological vices. And so what we're left with is an environment which can sustain some of these vices, or individuals who are part of an environment, and the individual sustains the vices themselves. So it's something I think, as educators, if we are interested in education as emancipation, intellectual emancipation, or otherwise, that we might take a bit more interest in, Because certainly what I've seen over the last number of years is a general decline in well, responsible and effective inquiry.
One of the things that's interesting about the way that you talk about vices, these vices, is what you call the attitudinal component. What do you mean by that? And how is that attitudinal component a particular kind of leverage point for trying to intervene and change people?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if we look at the attitudinal component in terms of summary evaluations of people, ideas, concepts, and so on, I see it as one of the building blocks of involved in ameliorating vices. That if we have an attitudinal vice toward a certain phenomenon, what then happens is a lot of our other cognitive powers and processes are sidelined because automatically we've made up a pretty slapdash evaluation of whatever the given phenomenon is. So I think if we work on the attitudinal side, we stand a chance of ameliorating, correcting, remedying, whatever phrase you choose to put on it, vices which are pretty pervasive in modern society.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a set of papers. Each of the papers is I really think outstanding in itself. Can you tell us a little bit about the contributors to this set? We don't have to go through each of the papers in detail, but part of this interview is to draw attention to the other papers as well.
Yeah, sure. So there are two other contributors, or three, including Alka. So there's Giada. She's based in the University of Glasgow at the moment. I've got to check that, but she's moved it a couple of times. And there's David Cody. He's in Australia, I think. And then there's Alkis Katsonis, who splits his time between University of Athens and Glasgow University. And all three of them, maybe with the exception of Alkis, were predominantly in philosophy. Alkis publishes in both philosophy and in Bill of Ed. And they're very interesting set of papers, given, I mean, just looking at Giada for a moment, looking at the concept of evidence, which is something that I think educators spend so much time on, but perhaps not enough conceptual care on when it comes to what exactly constitutes evidence and at what point is given body of evidence sufficient to hold a provision of belief about whatever it might be. So things like think about how this cashes out in practical settings, the learning styles hypothesis would be one, neural myths in education, another. Some people think there are evidence supporting both some false ideas posited and wrongly attributed to people working in those fields and so on. And then there's David Cody, who talks about epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, and takes a very interesting angle on things and he questions the overusage of the concepts and indeed goes back to the original iteration of the two concepts and looks to how it was really framed, but also looks to some limits around those two concepts and how the limits around how we talk about those two concepts may have detrimental effects for knowledge production and sharing, including what I call knowledge auditing as well. The stress testing is the strength of reasons supporting human belief or action.
Yeah, so thank you for this conversation, Gerry. Thank you for putting this set of papers together and bringing it to the journal. Really looking forward to this appearing. And I urge people, there's a link here to link through and to read each of the papers. They're very rich and extremely timely in their concerns. Thanks again, Gerry.
Thanks, Nick. Take care.